Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Laura Flusci. I'm the executive director here at MODA, which is the Museum of Design Atlanta. And I'm here this evening with my colleague, Tiffany Ricks, who is MODA's community engagement manager and who made this program happen. So thank you, Tiffany. There she is. At MODA, we define design as a creative process that inspires change, transforms lives, and makes the world a better place. And if there are two takeaways from that definition of design, they are that we believe in design as a powerful agent of change, and we're committed to sharing ways that designers can and are changing the world through programs like this one, through our exhibitions, and through our educational programs for children. I'm honored to be here with all of you this evening. There are a lot of people whose work I admire. The editors of the new book, Black Experience in Design, who are coming to us from across the United States and beyond. I'm excited about this groundbreaking book and about hearing the conversation that will ensue this evening. So thanks to all of you for being here. Also here with us this evening is fellow Atlantan Maurice Cherry. Maurice is a designer, a strategist, and founder of the podcast Revision Path, which he interviews Black designers and developers from around the world. You may know, we all know, I think, or many of us know that Revision Path is an invaluable contribution to the field. And some of us celebrate and know that it is the first podcast to be included in the permanent archive of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Yay, Maurice. Thank you for that. Thank you also, Maurice, for guiding this conversation. I'm going to hand you the mic in just a second so you can introduce our speakers and our panelists. But before I do, a couple of housekeeping things here. I'd like to ask everybody to mute if you haven't done it already. And as the conversation takes place, please feel free to put questions in the chat. If you want to share links or information and have them available after this event, there's another option as well. You can head over to the MODA website, which is museumofdesign.org, click on My MODA, and find this event. You'll be able to join a chat conversation there that will live on in coming days and weeks. So feel free to participate there as well. Maurice, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I guess we'll kick things off first by introducing the editors of this great book, Black Experience in Design. If you haven't picked it up, definitely get it. But we have four of the editors here tonight, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with them. So starting off, we are going to introduce Kelly Walters. Kelly Walters is a designer, educator, and founder of the multidisciplinary design studio Bright Polka Dot. Her ongoing design research interrogates the complexities of identity formation, systems of value, and the shared vernacular in and around Black visual culture. She's the author of Black, Brown, and Latinx Design Educators, Conversations on Design and Race, published by Princeton Architectural Press. Kelly is an assistant professor and associate director of the BFA Communication Design program at Parsons School of Design at the New School in New York. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Lesley Ann-Noel. Dr. Knowl focuses on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design education, research, and practice. She promotes greater critical awareness among designers and design students by introducing critical theory concepts and vocabulary into the design studio, for example, through the designer's critical alphabet and the positionality wheel. Next up, we have Kareem Collie. Kareem is a designer, strategist, and educator specializing in collaborative and human-centered design approaches to capture, reveal, and produce visual and experiential narratives. He holds a master's degree from NYU in Culture and Communication Studies and a bachelor's in Fine Arts from Pratt Institute in Communication Design. And last, we have Penina Laker. Penina is a designer and educator whose practice and research is centered around topics They utilize a human-centered approach to solving social problems locally and internationally. She is currently broadening the scope and access of design education to young people in Uganda through her Design Ed workshops. So we have, like I said, a tremendous panel here. Cannot wait to go ahead and kick things off with questions. So to Kelly, I want to sort of start this off with you. I would love to hear how you all sort of came together to work on this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing now as we look back and think about this process, how fast it was, and then also in slow at points. But Ann H. Berry had some early conversations with Penny and another collaborator, I think before reaching out to myself and the other editors. And I think that there was an interest based on the tumultuousness of spring and summer 2020, just the raging pandemic, just the way in which we were kind of mourning the deaths of various Black individuals by police, just the sort of all of these kind of intersecting elements coming together. There was a lot to process and a lot to really unpack. And I think through, again, our early connections to each other in various ways, I knew Ann and Jennifer Rittner through another book project that you mentioned. And then, I think we had connection between myself and Kareem. Kareem and I served on the Design Educators Steering Committee for AIGA. And then Kareem knew Leslie. I mean, we all sort of kind of crossed over to each other, and we knew each other in some way, or were a person away, if you will. And I think it was through, some of our early conversations about wanting to respond or wanting to figure out what to do, that we were trying to process that as designers, as educators, and it really went through a multitude of processes. I would say at first we were like, we're going to do a journal, we're going to make this publication in this kind of way. But I think through thinking about who we were reaching out to, contributors that were participating in the project, ourselves even, we knew that a book would have a wider reach and would be more all-encompassing for the different types of writing and contributions that we ended up including. So it was, I would say, it started as a opportunity to come together and reflect, and then it sort of continued to evolve as we each kind of brought our own insight into the project.
To that point, how did you all decide who would work on certain sections of the book? For those that have not read the book yet, there are 8 sections. Were there any challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I could say is that we each are, all 6 of us, right? Different individuals with different insight and practice to design. I think that each of us were trying to rely upon our own areas of research and interests. And I think we tapped into that, I think, at the very beginning of the project, thinking about all kinds of different subject area and terrain that were not sometimes overlapping, but also were kind of based in areas that we were closest to. And I think through the arc of the project, there were very clearly overlaps. There was oh, this could connect over here. So initially there were contributors that I had connected with during the process that ended up in a whole other chapter. Many of us have chapters that became kind of collapsed into one, or our contributors actually moved from one section to another. So we started with our interest in areas of focus, but also allowed for flexibility of movement, both in terms of what we were receiving from the contributors, but also what made sense thematically with the larger themes in the book.
And the 6th editor that Kelly's talking about is Jennifer Rittner, who is I believe she's currently a visiting professor at Parsons. With that, was there kind of a specific plan behind how the book was arranged? Because when I read through it, I got I don't know, maybe this is just the nerd in me, but I got a pretty clear-cut kind of 3-act hero's journey, sort of going on from education to application to congregation. So I'm curious, how did you all decide how to arrange the sections?
I love that. I don't think I've heard it referred to it that way. So we're gonna take that with us, I think. I love that that's like one way of viewing this. But I think that, like I said, I think part of it sort of was, we had at the very outset, we reached out to a lot of different contributors, and some of the loose themes, again, that we had, whether it was journeys in design, which was one chapter, or design practices, or community engaged design, there were very clear sort of buckets that we wanted to sort of make sure were included in the text. And I think that in terms of arrangement, some of it was about kind of thinking about that flow from start to finish. How do we open the book? How do we begin with our sort of introductory prefaces? And Jennifer does a really good job talking about intersectionality at the very outset of the book. And those things are really important. And I think our foreword with Emory Douglas that Colette Gator had in that conversation, it was really important for us to really think about how are we folding in this sort of intergenerational dialogue between multiple designers from different eras, but also in terms of how design has been seen. So in the very beginning of the book, you have these sort of, these texts by, the late Sylvia Harris, Dorothy Hayes. And then as we move from that sort of point into education and even differences in design practice, to a lot of contemporary designers sort of talking about how they're navigating in different disciplines, right? We sort of move to the sort of later half of the book where we have ways that folks are coming together, or we have introductions of imagery and work from students who are also currently in school at this moment. And then we kind of bookends where, there's an amazing letter by Penny that sort of really just is kind of speaking to the future, if you will. And so I think thinking about it in that way, and also ending with guiding questions and the glossary, for us was about even seeing the book as a journey from, multiple periods in time, but also just different ways of seeing design practice.
I want to focus kind of going to the book from start to finish, kind of touching on each chapter as I talk to all of you. So Kareem, let's start off with you. You worked on this first section in the book that's called Design Practices. What did you want to communicate to the reader with respect to design practice?
Yeah, I wanted to, I think, well, a couple of things. One, it was the summer of 2020 when we started working on this, and I'd actually been thinking a lot about practice, and just not even practice from a design standpoint, but just practice. How do we create sustainable practices for ourselves? We were in the midst of some serious upheaval in our lives, and finding a solid practice was something that stood out to me as something that could help sustain me during that time. So when this chapter came up, I was saying, okay, this seems like a really interesting way to approach this. And so I wanted to really bring attention and intentionality to the way we work to protect ourselves. And this idea of practice seemed to be a good way of thinking about that. And especially when we look at all of these amazing designers, like the very unique ways that we approach design, approach engaging in these different spaces that aren't always the healthiest for us, right? Sometimes harmful, sometimes even a bit toxic. And so what are we doing? What kind of practices do we put in place to make it through the day? And so forming real intentionality about that, and reminding us, the readers of the book, that the things that we're doing daily, that we may be doing subconsciously to make our way through, is something that we can really begin to lean into and hone through practice, and bringing some really great minds together through these contributors to talk about how they have been doing their practices as a way of gaining success in their career, as Black people and Black bodies in spaces that aren't necessarily always, like I said, there for them, I thought was really important.
And just to kind of lean into that that area of practice a bit more, there's a specific quote in the intro to this section that goes, "What must we master in our journey to master our craft?" Which I guess, in a way kind of speaks to what you're saying regarding practice. And I think we've all heard that saying, practice makes perfect, of course. How do the essays in this section answer that question?
Yeah, I think just to pick at this idea of practice makes perfect. I think for me, going back to the that moment in time, I was really thinking of practice more as a tool for reflection and adjustment and refinement, and really awareness, not really moving towards perfection, but trying to get into a sustained way of progress, right? And so thinking of that like through meditation and so forth. So anyhow, but rather than moving towards perfection, maybe more thinking about moving towards moving through a journey towards maturity, even, right? And so the folks in this section, I thought, from a design standpoint, were extremely successful in their fields and had a sense of that maturity about them. And I wanted to really highlight how they moved along this journey of practice, and to highlight how it showed up in the different ways that they presented it maturely. Does that answer that question?
Yeah.
Just needling at it a little bit. And then, so just specifically thinking about Van Graves, I think his is such a great example of this practice of building a wall, right? Building this wall of accomplishments that consistently presents him as someone who exists, right? Someone that you can't look past when you're talking about a designer who has found success. That success is very visible, and he has put in place a practice of presenting that work. And then there's John Key's essay on the 4 pillars, which I thought was just a really beautiful representation of practice, where John references their Southernness, Blackness, queerness, and family as tools, or even a framework that they use to move through their life, both as a human being and also as a designer, and how those characteristics show up in their work, right? And so the practice of doing that, the practice of reflecting on one's life and presenting that work in a way that is highlighting, supporting, shielding, in ways that, again, if you're not doing it intentionally, you may not even be aware that it's happening, right? And that bringing that intentionality to it, that practice of it, that honing of it, really creates a tool that can kind of cut through the mess of the world that we live in.
I love that idea about like practice as reflection. I really like that. John and I actually are both from Alabama. He's from Dothan, I believe. I'm from Selma. So Dothan, for people that don't know that know about Alabama, Dothan actually has a really famous opera house. But I think the opera house is closed now. I don't know, just inserting a little trivia there. Dr. Knowl, I want to turn the conversation to you. What was the thought in the sections you edited on approaching the Black design experience from the perspective of academia and scholarship?
So I was hoping that you'd ask me about the next chapters, but
We'll get there. We'll get there.
you'll get there. You'll get there. So with regard to scholarship, I reached out to academics. There's a little bit of overlap in the two chapters. We have one about education and one about scholarship. I believe those are the titles, right? And so I reached out to people who I knew were doing maybe interesting design research. Audrey Bennett has written about, well, a lot of us as designers learn about the golden ratio. And Audrey Bennett has this article that debunks that theory that is pretty interesting. Of course, I had to reach out to Cheryl Miller. And, so that chapter is about the research that Black design educators were doing that we could share as our scholarship, right? So, some of the essays in the book are about the Black design experience, and some of the essays are about the research and the work of Black designers. And so that scholarship chapter, I believe, is a little bit more of that, where, Alicia Ajayi, her essay is very interesting, where she analyzes freedom papers as a symbol, a designed artifact, and then starts to ask some questions about modern day design artifacts that take away our freedom or give freedom, and so that's pretty interesting. And then David Pilgrim as well writes this really interesting piece about how his museum is teaching people about racism and social justice using these artifacts that are that were considered racist or are considered racist. So it's I enjoy reading that article as, I suppose, a research nerd. Where I can see, oh, this is the research that some of my design colleagues are doing. You don't see a lot of Black faces at design research conferences. So it's really important for me to figure out who was doing this research and how could we share this research, And if we had space, we would have found more people. There are more people. We only were able to include, let's say, those 5 essays, but it was really important to put that work that is a little bit more academic in quotes into that chapter.
And I think what's important with both of those chapters, with having those perspectives, is that it shows that not only are Black designers doing this research and that their work is alive in that way, in sort of this historical archival aspect, but that it's also still continuing. It's living. We are kind of living and doing this as people right now, as opposed to kind of reading about it also in our history books. To that end, in that third section, there's a essay by Ni Komi Bachwe that I thought it was really moving, because she rejects the Black design experience, she rejects it altogether. She calls it death. Why was it important to include that viewpoint in that section?
All right. And I guess heads up, my internet is a little unstable, but Ni is a professor in South Africa. And it was important. When I got Ni's essay, I was a little bit kind of taken aback, because, Ni asked some important questions. What is Blackness? And then what is design? And it actually was a much longer essay that we had to shorten for the book, but it left me with so many questions about that we have to think about, as we talk about this Black experience in design. We have to remember that Blackness is not, it's not monolithic. There isn't one form of Blackness. The person who is Black from South Africa is going to see Blackness different to the person who is Black from the Caribbean, who will see something different, have a different Black experience to the person in America. there will be some overlaps, but there are some differences that we have to keep in mind, you know. And then the other question that Nee asked is, you know, what is this design thing that we're talking about, right? Which I think is a good question. Are we only tying design to this tradition that grew out of the Bauhaus, or are we seeing design in a broader way? So I think that these are good questions for us to keep in mind. So it was important to leave that essay in as maybe, I don't have to say shocking or challenging, or, you know, that essay challenges
in a way.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah, and I want to apologize. I misspoke earlier. Nee is a male. I meant to say he, not she, so I apologize about that. But
That's fine.
It's interesting because I've interviewed designers from the continent for Revision Path, and it's interesting to talk about Black design to African designers, because in a way, at least the perception that I've gotten from them is that Black, or at least Black in that moniker way, almost feels more wholly Western and American as opposed to in and of the continent. So like when someone says the Black experience in design, it doesn't necessarily mean Black people in Africa. That's a totally different kind of concept.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
definitely. And yeah, these are important questions for us to keep in mind, that we frame Blackness differently in different places.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For the next section, I want to talk to Kareem and Penina. I want to talk to both of you because you kind of both co-edited this next section. That's a really interesting section of the book. If we look at the question that was sort of posed, I think, in the description about this event, I think one of the questions is like, what can we as a community do about these issues now in terms of design and equity and things like that? There's a lot of kind of varying answers to that. Can you speak on that complexity?
I'm happy to jump in, and Kareem, you can hop in. So I think it's interesting because in this chapter on community engaged design, activism, advocacy, when we were first putting the book together, community engaged design was its own chapter. And I think Kareem at the time was working on a different chapter that was touching on activism, advocacy, and things like that. But it actually makes a lot of sense that the voices and the ideas sort of exist in one place, because like you hinted at, Maurice, there's so many threads that are interconnected, especially I think when we think about the practice of community engaged design. I think that whether it's, you know, research, pedagogy, it provides such a great avenue for designers to uncover new ideas, to tinker a little bit, to fail, to co-create within their own communities, but also challenges them to think about what it looks like to either advocate for voices that are often marginalized if they don't belong to those communities. So I think just that practice in general provides a great sort of medium within which we can start to identify some interesting themes and also challenge some existing and very problematic processes that exist today. So what can we do today? I think the contributors in the chapter do a good job of not only sharing from their own personal experiences, but also from their practices, and also posing questions, more questions than answers, which I think in itself is important, because there isn't one single solution to a lot of the issues that we see today. Because I think a lot of the issues we see today, or that whether it's within our field specifically, there are layers of those that are very systemic and historical. So as I was thinking about today's conversation and trying to think about the chapter through the lens of what we might do, or maybe thinking about like a connective tissue, which is healing, I started to think about how it's interesting in that chapter, you start to see the contributors touch on themes of how we can nurture healing for ourselves. So whether it's Liz Ogbo in her essay, Preconditions for Healing, where she writes that grieving, like culture change doesn't just happen, that you know, it takes a collection of healers to work to tend those wounds. So for me, as I read that again, I'm asking myself, what does it mean for me to be a part of that healing process, either as someone that participates in that process or someone that helps to advocate for or facilitate for that to happen, that grieving has to happen for there to be healing or for there to be conversations around restoration or reparations or whatever that might be. But then we also see what it looks like for us to be stewards of healing. So whether it's Michelle Washington in her essay Biophilia Patterns in Black and Brown Spaces, which is really fascinating, like this whole practice of biophilia, but she reflects on her own journey towards embracing a biophilic practice and invites us to think about that as well. So in that piece, she actually shares about a project that her and her students took on to co-create with a community that had been harmed by segregationist and class-driven urban planning practices. And what does it mean for us to be back in touch with nature and get back in those practices that allow for us to steward healing. I also think about how part of that process, when you think about what we can do, it's also thinking about how we can rediscover our identity. So whereas in Mugendi Mutareda's essay, which is really bringing a voice from the continent. So his essays on participatory and emancipatory aspirations for Africa. I love that in that essay, he lists so many names that you would never encounter in a design education. So many names that remind you of who your ancestors are. So many names that perhaps we should do a better job of honoring, but many names that have been excluded from our education. But now through pieces like this or a book like this, we can start to rediscover that identity as we heal ourselves, but also as we find a new sense of pride in ourselves. So it's learning about who those people are, and also recognizing that they're not just from the design field, but they're coming from other fields that are adjacent to design, whether it's music, whether it's just the arts and things like that. So there are a lot of just great inspirations there. So definitely a lot of interesting themes. And I also think that in the chapter, you can sort of start to see how the different contributors touch, whether it's through their own personal stories or even just thinking about larger questions that are posed. So I think about, so another example I'll give you is, so June Grant does a good job in her piece, The Center in the Margins, Locating Intimacy in Multi-Communities, where she's sort of, as an architect, spatial designer, working in to plan how communities can be designed. She kind of, in her piece, argues for community building models. So we talk about, community design, community building versus community engagement. What does it really look like for us to build communities? How can we challenge existing models that don't usually center the voices of the people that they should be centering? And so we see like multi-unit housing solutions, which really are shelters, as being popularized, whereas we should be thinking about multi-community approaches to building solutions for housing. But at the same time, we can't talk about multi-community approaches when in the American way itself, we haven't really dealt with what it means for us to live together. We haven't really tackled those issues. So there are ideas, maybe not so many answers, but there are provocations, there are more questions asserted, and you start to see how complex these issues are. But I think also we start to see how we ourselves contribute to those issues, but also how we can find solutions by healing ourselves first. So I don't know if that's making sense. I feel like I've been reflecting on this just by virtue of this conversation. So I'll pass it off to Kareem a little bit. Maybe you can add something.
Yeah,
I have a quick thing to add to that. Yeah, I just have a quick thing because Amos and his essay says something that I love. Like it was a great interview that I had with him, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I left really asking some questions, but he says something that I love, which is that every human being is an advocate, right? And the question is, what kind of advocate are you, right? And so to your point, Penina, it's really, all of these folks in this essay, in this section, are good examples of of individuals being advocates, right, through their practice and really trying to transform and be a part of communities and amplify communities. So in all of the complexity that exists around them.
Yeah, I'd have to say when I read through the essays in that section, I feel like they all share this concept of healing, like it's restoration, it's reparation in some cases, it's community as convalescence. Like I really like that, and it is a super important concept. It actually reminds me a lot of I don't know how many of you have been to the Black in Design conference that Harvard puts on every other year. They started in 2015. I remember the first year that they did it, they focused a lot on space. And when they meant space, they meant the physical space, because Harvard's Graduate School of Design is largely dealing with like architecture, you know, the physical space in that aspect. But they sort of started as small as, I believe, like a neighborhood, and then advanced it out to like a town, a region. And so seeing how design is used to bring community in, to heal in certain aspects, I thought was something that was just really interesting.
Yeah.
Kareem, you mentioned Amos's essay. I guess I'll, you know, ask this to both of you. Which of the essays in this section kind of touched you the most?
It's a tough one. I think that this section was really interesting, and I enjoyed really working with all of the different contributors in this section. You know, if I were going to do a roll call, like I want to do a roll call than just like point out one person, because I think that they all bring really important ideas to the table, you know, and so they're touching in very different ways. You know, for example, you know, Michelle Washington's speech that Penny mentioned is about biophilia, this notion of being of how nature is important to being, right, to living and having a healthy engagement with existing on this planet, and how, you know, historically the natural environment has kind of been ripped away from the Black community, especially when you get into like public housing and some of these very urban areas. And, you know, so, you know, that's just one example, but to be transparent, I really enjoyed my conversation with Amos. Like the conversation that I had with him left me feeling like, oh, wow, let me check myself, right? Like, you know, when I asked him, you know, how does he see himself as a designer? His response was, oh, I don't see myself as a designer. I see myself as a lost human, right? You know, and then just to begin to lean into that idea around, you know, his desire to exist in a place where capitalism wasn't driving how he was trying to position himself, right? And how design is a tool and to meet, you know, his goals of being a better human. And just that conversation was really rich. But I would be, and I'm totally like not answering your question straight up, Maurice, my bad. But I really also loved Jen White Johnson's piece. It was just a really beautiful piece, and you know, as a parent, it was great to hear how much her relationship with her child inspires the work that she does. And so those are just a couple that I enjoy and love amongst the whole group, to which I do love as well. I'm a sucker, sorry.
Okay, let me try and just do it. I think if there's one piece that I feel like maybe I feel most connected to selfishly because of my Ugandan roots is Professor Mugendi's piece. Just, you know, I think being an African, I really appreciated having someone write about the contributions that Africans could bring to this conversation when it comes to whether it's emancipatory practices or even just like thinking about how we can challenge human-centered design or design thinking by thinking about how else we can work with communities. And I think from an African sort of perspective, we hear of themes like Sankofa looking, at the past, inform the future, honoring your ancestors. But I also think, it's things like Ubuntu, just really thinking about what it means to live together. And so to hear his contribution of those ideas and themes in this context, I think was very touching to me, as well as also just learning about all these other great people that I should know of, because they're amazing and they're ancestors and they just have been excluded. So yes, that piece.
Dr. Knowl, I'm going to pass the mic to you. I want to dive into section 5 of this book, Afrofuturism in Design. I want you to kind of give a definition of Afrofuturism for us, because I think when people hear it now, particularly through a lot of media interpretations, I think it's mostly misconstrued as just purely speculative fiction.
That might be an okay place to start,
Okay.
Yeah, but it's like this futures that are centered in African ideas or the ideas of Black people, the futures that Black people are interested in. I have to say it like that because actually one of the essays, one or two of the essays, the people corrected me and said, not Afrofuturism, African futurism, and so there's a range, but it's this idea of us creating these futures that we are interested in, that we want to see ourselves thriving in. And so I really was interested in this chapter because I wanted us to think about these visionary futures. We were all so angry in 2020.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that, part of our own liberation and freedom, and, it comes with us also talking about how are we thriving, what are these futures that we're imagining? And so I was interested in talking with people who were using Afrofuturism in their work as designers. I had seen Lonnie Brooks give a presentation kind of in the middle of June 2020 that I just thought was so inspiring. So when I got called to this project, I was like, okay, I want Lonnie's work in this book because he has that games about Afrofuturism, where young people are coming together and collectively designing the futures that they're interested in. And these futures are inspired by Afrofuturism. So I thought that was really, we needed that. I had heard Woodrow Winchester talk about his African-centered design a couple of years before. And again, I thought that was something that I wanted in this chapter because, Woodrow Winchester is saying that kind of like forget human-centered design. If you are focusing on specific groups, you are going to get better design, right? And so he's promoting African-centered design so that people are really focusing on the groups that have need, that we can figure out, once we are focusing on these groups, then we will get much better design products and services. Mm-hmm. Kareem introduced me to the work of Ada Paris, and Ada asks us, what ancestor would we like to be? And I think that that's a really kind of poignant, it's a really interesting question, for you to think, okay,
yeah,
who am I going to be in the future, right? That's, well, what is the legacy that I'm leaving? It is a question that kind of shakes up your mind a little bit, right? And I admired John Jennings' work. He's the illustrator of the illustrated version of Parable of the Sower. And he teaches a class where he's bringing Afrofuturism into his design class. So I was really excited about just being able to engage with John a little bit. And then for Wilson, I didn't actually know for Kelly, you made the connection with Fo, and Fo is one of the people who's talking also about African futurism. So her work fit within this chapter. But the idea behind this chapter was to get us to also be future focused and not focus only on the harm that maybe we experience as Black designers. You know, it's like, what are the strategies that we are using? The resilience strategies that we're using, you know, what are the strategies that we're using to find the future, to chart the future? And yeah, the idea of this chapter was to get people to talk about that.
Yeah, to quote the work of Alicia Wormsley, there are Black people in the future. So if you only watch the Jetsons, don't believe that. We're here. And I like you mentioned Ada Paris's essay, because this is a question I actually want to, you know, kind of put out to the whole panel. What type of ancestor do you want to be? Anyone can jump in.
I hope to be an ancestor who qualifies to be an ancestor.
Oh, go ahead.
I just gonna say, you know, I hope one day to, you know, to be an ancestor that others can look back to and feel encouraged to build upon, and just one who, you know, there's this, I don't even know if it's a proverb or a saying, that there isn't a single raindrop that considers itself the cause of a flood. And sometimes I think when you think about a lot of the issues that maybe we would like to be a part of creating solutions for, we get so caught up in how big and macro they are, but sometimes you think of yourself as a small little raindrop, and you just like do a little bit there. Others will keep building on it, and you know, there'll be this like critical mass. So I hope to be a single raindrop.
How poetic.
Nice. I'll say quickly, you know, I'm not there yet, but if there's anyone who is a model for me, it would be my great grandmother. And, you know, just shout out to Alabama, because that's also where my family on my mom's side is from. So that, you know, Tuskegee. But I think for me, one of the things that I feel like I learned very quickly as a child, and just growing up with her in particular, because my mother's mother passed away when I was very young, that in many ways it skipped a generation. And as an elder and as an ancestor to me now, I think that what I saw from her was like a shepherding of her family, of her children, of her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. And I hope that I can be anywhere near where she has been, and just navigating many different terrain, but also championing the people that she is, you know, in charge of or in care for. So that's what I would hope to be as an ancestor. And again, just Johnny Mae Tyson, shout out to my great grandmother.
I can jump in there next. Man, it's such a great question. Because as you ask it, it sort of ballooned in my mind a little bit. And I'll tell you where it started, because I have 2 young children at home. And so I've been thinking a lot about, you know, just the foundation, right, that I'm creating for them. And, you know, and so if I were going to think of a metaphor, I really, as an ancestor, want to be a really strong rung in the ladder, right? I want to be like that titanium rung, right? That's, you know, that when you step on it, you know that it's supporting you up the rest of to the destination that you're going to. And so to me, that looks like one, you know, really just beginning to nurture in such a way that I create caring human beings that are going to, you know, be supportive and have action within communities. And also, you know, just to be real, just make sure that there's the beginning of some wealth, you know, there for them to have as, you know, as they're moving up the ladder and helping to support them. But that's me and my very selfish sort of like interpretation of your question. To think about it more like broadly, I think I want to be an ancestor that for a larger community, right, that has impact, right, that, and I think as a designer and as an educator, those are two places where I know that if I practice, right, and bring intention to what I'm practicing, and I can create tools or artifacts or experiences that will be long lasting. So that's maybe I think an answer to your question.
Yeah, maybe like you, Kareem, I'm thinking, okay, design ancestor, right? I don't know if I'm a titanium rung, but I'm these days really trying to not be invisible, because I think that people need to see other people who could look like them, in whatever ways, and people sometimes reach out and see interesting connections between me and them that I might not have thought of. It's not them seeing me as a Black woman being visible, that it might be that, oh, I am from another country and you are also from another country, or you are also a parent, or so the kind of ancestor that I am right now is, I suppose, just that I'm trying to be visible so other people can see themselves in this world of design, because design is a field that asks a lot of people to fit in, and the more people that they could see who maybe do not fit in, the more comfortable more people will be, right? So I mean, I don't take my child everywhere, but I'll talk about my child, right? Or I'll talk about that I studied in Latin America, or again, just so that people can make these connections for themselves and see, oh, design is not only white, male, Euro North American centric. There are other ways of defining design and other ways that we can show up in this industry.
Wow, thank you everybody for indulging me in that question. That was powerful. Kelly, I want to go to you next, because the next two sections in the book, Journeys in Design and Design Equals Art Does Not Equal Design, these were yours. And it's a pretty big lift, not just because it's two chapters back to back, but you're also kind of transitioning ideas from, the fantastical to the practical. Like, how did you approach those two sections as an editor?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I guess I'll start with Journeys in Design first. I think that, this book project came on the heels of my very first book project, Black, Brown, Latinx Design Educators. And I think there were so many questions that were emerging for me out of that project. That's how I met Anne, that's how I met Jennifer. I just felt like the understanding someone's arc, someone's journey, whether that be through a particular discipline or through, learning about design in the first place, I would say, from their academic training. I was really interested in exploring that further. And the contributors that are in Journeys in Design sort of touch on various aspects. The chapter it begins with an essay, but mostly a visual infographic that was contributed by Yocasta LaChapelle. And in it, it sort of captures this sort of journey, if you will, with obstacles and barriers and struggles or things that are surfacing for Black designers. And it starts from pre-college through college and post-college. And I was really fascinated by beginning the chapter in that kind of way, and then actually going into specificity with the contributors. We learn and gain insight into how some of those barriers actually take form. So I think in a lot of ways I was interested in seeing an overview and how folks are sort of navigating and understanding what a journey could be. And even Forrest Young sort of speaks to like a journey in a more holistic overview kind of way. But then we get into these very specific personal experiences that are, you know, speaking to what one is only dealing with or how they've navigated the world. And so I liked that balance of kind of having an overview and having specificity. And then in the second chapter, design equals art does not equal design, you know, I was just thinking a lot about, you know, many of us who sit in the intersections of multiple spaces as artists, as designers, understanding and trying to navigate between worlds, the way that the language around saying art or design creates camps, creates friction, creates tension. And I wanted the title to actually embody that, and for the discussions that are in this chapter to also reflect that as well. So, you know, those were some of the, I would say, just kind of high level things that I was thinking about from the difference between those two chapters.
I was going to ask you about that title, because I mean, for folks that don't know, I have a math degree, so I love math, and so I saw this inequality, and I'm like, I wonder if there was purpose behind kind of showing that tension. So thank you.
Oh yeah, like
illustrating that.
definitely purpose, definitely purpose.
In the first section in Journeys in Design, like, was there a specific essay that really kind of stood out to you?
Yes, I think one essay in particular that I, you know, I'm just thankful for in working with Chessa Garbut, who did an essay called Provoking Type. And this was, it was amazing to work with Chessa on this project throughout the duration of the book, sort of evolving and coming into being, because Chessa was open in like letting me be part of the process of what they were writing, how they were sort of seeing their own understanding of typeface design, navigating and exploring their own sort of intersection and hyphenation, as you'll see in the chapter, how they're describing who they are. And I think that I loved the directness. I loved the you know, provocation and what was being stated. And then the sort of interspersal of their work, of their typeface design work that's a part of the actual essay. And I think the other one that I would say that's really a highlight in this chapter that came in at the very tail end, and Anne was like, you know, we were about to go to press, and Anne's like, you know, like, we can't have any more, like, we're trying to like wrap it up, but was a work by, an interview by Aisha Richards. And this interview was really potent and powerful because I met Aisha when I was teaching at Central St. Martin's a few years ago. And I was like, there was a lot of really interconnection. I'll just be really brief about it, but there was connection between my, you know, undergraduate institution and her having sort of been doing a study abroad program there. And I remember meeting her, and I was like her sort of work with shades of noir, which I would definitely highlight folks take a look at, out in the UK and specifically in University Arts London. That work is amazing. It's just phenomenal, the programming and things that she is doing. But she had an interview that I thought was really, it's really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. It's direct. It sort of highlights these very specific instances that I think many of us have experienced in really white and predominantly white environments and institutions. And so I think as another standout for me, that interview holds so much, and also reflects how much Black women hold in these spaces and still have to be both, you know, this neutral figure that's explaining what has just happened and also being calm, you know, at the same time. And so I really highlight that interview because of that reason. And so I'll just kind of put it in that kind of frame for those two works for sure.
I thought it was also really interesting in the first section that there is a lot of imagery. Like, I'm thinking particularly about Yocasta LaChapelle's essay / I don't know, there's a lot of diagrams it almost seems, where she's kind of tracking this development. Why was it important to kind of include this imagery along these essays?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the visual, the part of me that's like so excited about supplementing text with like another sort of graphic component, to me that it made a lot of sense in my mind to support some of these sort of reflected essays, or in the case of Yocasta LaChapelle's piece, kind of seeing it in a as a schematic. There's sometimes, I think, a different way of understanding and interpreting information when you're kind of following a flow or following a sort of like direction, if you will. And so I think that those images show up in that particular kind of contribution. They also show up in, again, another sort of, again, this is Anne sort of got annoyed with me at the end, but I had this idea and I pitched it to all the editors of including imagery from our current and former design students. And so that was something that I just felt we had emerging designers, we had mid-career and sort of really seasoned designers throughout the book, that I really felt it was important that we include, students that we're currently working with or have recently graduated. And one way that we were able to sort of invite them into the process was to share these images that hold very particular significance to them in their design journey. And I think, again, as another varied sort of contribution to the book that distinguishes it from like another section or another chapter, these images sort of help add another texture layer, I would say, to the book itself.
And then in the next section about design equals art does not equal design, that had a lot of interviews as well. Was that kind of purposeful to, again, illustrate the tension that is alluded to from the title?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of things. Like I said, I was excited to be in dialogue with many artists, designers that are included in this chapter. And part of it was because you hear their voice, you hear what they are reflecting on, you hear their journey. It's not been modified in this way where I'm sort of resharing back what they just said, but rather there's sort of a presence of that person and their work. And I think for me, I think I love interviews, and I think that might be part of why like it slants a little bit to that sort of way. But also one thing that we knew, I think all of the editors, as we had talked to the outset of the project, is that there are some folks who are, already writing. There are some folks who are not so comfortable in writing. How do we bring like a different mix of people into the discussion? Some people don't have enough time even, and I know Leslie will speak to that in terms of like capturing a voice and, allowing them to be part of the larger discussion. But knowing that interviews were a way to sort of bring forth that contribution to the book. And so there were many factors, I would say, that sort of were part of that rationale. And then I also know that like there was an interview in this chapter that Anne had done that, again, as we were rethinking about like where things are being placed and moving through the book, it had a natural fit in this chapter to be situated here, from where it had previously, as we were like kind of mapping it out, it made a lot of sense with Rhea Combs. So I think that, there was a lot of really, cross conversation that we were having throughout the book to kind of figure out how to get enough of a varied mix of content, but also style of content. And this chapter happens to be one that, leaned on interviews.
And now to pass the mic on to Leslie, this book ends with the section Collective, Radical, and Liberatory Spaces in Design. And I think that I like that it's at the end because it really kind of brings all of the lessons from every section to like this satisfying coda. What did you want to illustrate with this section?
Maurice, you have to go on this book tour with us. You describe it probably much better than we do. But yeah, so this section again is about, okay, Black people can be painted as victims, as people who are suffering, as, oh my, I don't know about everyone, other people on this call, but in June 2020, I got a whole lot of random apologies from people almost for just being Black, you know, and I know other people have had that kind of experience. So the idea of this last chapter is, again, what are we doing for ourselves, right? So you're in this chapter, right? You know, this chapter has all of the people who just created spaces for themselves. And it was about them sharing their stories, you know, their visionary stories or their visionary advice, like Adrienne Marie Brown was sharing advice for us as Black designers. But, you know, Lauren Williams, I don't know how I got on to Lauren, but I think maybe I met Lauren through the State of Black Design the year before.
Okay.
And Lauren's story is pretty radical. You know, Lauren, I might mess up the story, but, you know, it's like she left traditional academia in a very radical way. And so her letter is to Black women saying, you are enough. You don't need these spaces, right? And Terrence Moline writes about how he formed the AAGD, the African American Graphic Design group. You wrote your piece in, I didn't know if you already had that essay already written because you didn't have to make any edits at all, right? But I mean, it's an inspiring story, you know, because you would start off talking about how the podcast almost didn't happen. And we need to hear that, you know, and I think that this chapter has these stories of people who said, hey, my Black design career almost didn't happen, and this is what I did, right? Like Maleni Barnett's story about the Black, oh my gosh, I'm gonna badge, BADG, the guild.
Oh yeah, Black
right?
Artists Designers Guild, yeah.
Yes, yes. It's a similar kind of story where she's saying that we were invisible, so we created our own guild, you know? To hear these stories that, you know, we don't just have to be the victims because this other society didn't want to create space for us. We can create the spaces that we need, which is kind of where we end with Adrienne Marie Brown, where she's, you know, she says, this is our time, or this is your time as Black designers, you know, so we can make these spaces that we want for us.
That's one thing about Black folks. We will make a way out of no way. So that definitely speaks to our ingenuity. And you know, these spaces that are mentioned in this section, they were born out of, you know, these kind of unjust and inequitable conditions, you know, neglect, omission, discomfort. Because of these, you know, pervasive feelings, these new spaces were born. And this is probably a pretty lofty question, so feel free to take some time with this, but given where we are now in society, how do you think designers can help create a just and equitable world?
So I'm just gonna say, which is kind of what I was gonna answer on the last question with the ancestors. These days I'm really kind of doing for us, by us kind of, you know, I'm focusing on issues and agendas that are important to Black people, people of color, you know, Latino community, the communities that are important to me. Mm-hmm. That's where I'm focusing my design work. And maybe that doesn't answer your question at all, but, you know, it's like, if we focus on the needs of the people, or supporting the people with the most need, maybe that's what gets us to this just and equal society.
Okay. Just to, you know, oh no, anyway, Kareem, you want to jump in?
I thought this was, I wasn't sure if it was a question.
Yeah,
for
well, you know what?
group.
Everyone can take a stab at it.
Well, I was just thinking about it as sort of I think this book shows that it's a bit of a multi-pronged approach to that, creating that just world, right? Whether it be from, you know, the community up, like in the community section, or reimagining the potential when we think about the Afro future. I was also thinking about, even in the practice section, from the inside of the machine, where Dantley Davis is talking about, as Dantley was the chief design officer of Twitter until a few months ago, as an advocate for bringing in more designers and people of color into technology, right? And really aggressively pushing and making that headway as a leader in those spaces, right? And so, from the lens of like capitalism, from the lens of the community, from the lens of sort of like imagined futures, I think that it has to be attacked from different points. So I think this book is telling that story in a nice way.
Anybody else want to answer? You don't have to. Don't feel obligated if you don't want to. Well, just
maybe
Oh,
just maybe a little thing,
Okay.
because I think Leslie and Kareem did a good job. I think being a part of just by virtue of existing in that just an equitable world of future, I think in itself is something that we start to think about as being critical for how we advance a lot of these ideas, and so I think it's also like asking ourselves, what does it look like to exist, like Leslie was saying, to be visible and to contribute, and yeah, I think in some ways this book starts to, at least for me, was one way to start thinking about what does it mean to exist in that world, to be a participant in that world that I would like to see, and yeah, and maybe eventually an ancestor as well. So
Kelly, did you want to chime in or no?
We can keep, I want to make sure we get time for
questions, yeah.
I know we're almost at time, so I can be okay.
Okay, and just to wrap it up, since Penina, we were just talking with you, we've covered a lot of ground in this roundtable. Again, shout out to all of you for not just your work on the book, but also with tonight's roundtable. I want to wrap this up with Penina's essay at the end of the book titled Letter to Future Designers. What are the thoughts and feelings that you wanted to express with this final essay?
This was a tough one because there were definitely a lot of feelings, and those feelings changed. It feels like on a weekly, monthly basis. I think sometimes there are feelings of just annoyance of like, you read the stories or some of the Lauren Williams, and you get mad and you're like, why do we have to go through this? And then you have moments where you're like, you're so excited because you see some innovative ideas and practices being shared, and you look at all the scholarship coming and you're like, oh my goodness, there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot here that if I had a book like this, starting my design career, I would feel excited and probably have a lot more confidence in how I lay the foundation for my education. So this piece, in some ways, I think I had to think about it as a letter to my future self. So if I were an up and coming designer, or maybe in high school or just considering this field, what would I hope a book like this would provide for me? And I think I was trying to articulate that by sharing my own story. So I was very fortunate in my early design career. I stumbled upon design in Uganda, I would say by force, by fire. Not that I was forced into it, but I was in a liberal arts education and I had to take some classes in the area. So, but I never really considered it as a space that I could see myself existing because I was never introduced to it. I didn't really see people like myself in that space. And so I was very lucky and fortunate to have to have people like Anne Berry walk along with me on that journey, and to see her existing and being brilliant and doing that work. I started to think about how I could see myself in that. So just like a nice little reminder that there are a lot of people who have gone before us. Then there is us that this future generation gets to build upon. So there's this Ghanaian proverb that I I reference that says those who are born on an anthill take a short time to grow. That just by virtue of the fact that you're going to be growing and existing on this body of knowledge, you should have a short time to get there, because there's a lot. Just like even for how frustrating or hard it might seem, it was harder for those before us. So, let's let that maturity starts to get shorter and faster. And so, there's an excitement so I wanted them to really see that, to be able to reference this, to be proud, to be confident, to want to contribute. I think Anne does a really good job in the intro. She talks about how, we must share, we must tell, we must write, we must document, we must contribute. Sylvia Harris's mandate to us was, add to the body of knowledge. You see her in her career do that. So what does it mean for us to do that? So I was trying to capture some of that in the last little paragraph that I'll read. I said that your children growing on top of an anthill are a repository of stories, lessons, teachings, and innovations that provide a deeper context into your past, your present, your future. Our hope is that you will emerge with more confidence, a well-rounded understanding of who you are and where you come from. We hope that you will take up the mantle of sharing your experiences and uphold the tradition of boldly and proudly telling your stories, adding layer upon layer of knowledge that the world can't help but recognize.
Wow, that's a great place to end off. Kareem Collie, Penina Laker, Dr. Lesley Ann-Noel, Kelly Walters, thank you again, not just for your contributions to the book, but for this amazing, amazing conversation tonight. We are going to open it up to the audience. Tiffany, I think we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Kelly, Penina, Leslie, Kareem. We're so grateful to have you. Thank you everyone in the audience for your questions throughout, and please feel free to turn your mic off if there's time to add your question, if you feel more comfortable just saying it from your video. We'll start with the first question. Maurice, Ashton, are you still available to ask your question, or you can come up?
Sure. For the essay establishing a research trajectory, were there any major takeaways as you all were reading through and editing that particular essay?
So I'm going to respond, but it's a hard question. So Cheryl actually changed her essay while we were editing the book, so initially she shared her acceptance speech, and we just wanted to create space for Cheryl to share her brilliance. So it wasn't that we wanted, I suppose, a specific takeaway. It is that, Cheryl Miller has been writing about design. She has been in the trenches for a really long time. And basically, whatever she wanted to share, we wanted it, right? So, as one of the editors who was working very closely with Cheryl, I'm sharing that kind of backstory. We were going in a different direction, and then we actually switched the essay out. But it really was a space for Cheryl to share. So she was trying to share how she went about creating this research trajectory for herself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ashton, you had another question? I can read it off. You had asked, was it mentally and emotionally taxing to read these essays and be in these conversations? Is that for all of us, or?
I can jump in, and then also just before more people leave, I'm gonna also plug another event. I'll answer the question, but I'm gonna plug another event that's happening next week with some of the BEID contributors. So I'm just gonna put it in the chat here. Pathways to Design, which is next Tuesday 3 to 4. Here's a link if you want to register, but it'll be a panel with some of the contributors as listed here. Jennifer and I are moderating that conversation. So I just want to make sure I say that first. But in terms of just sort of the process, I think, what's really important that I think was different in this project for me than other projects that I've participated in is that I was doing this with 6 editors. And I think what was really important is that each of us were sort of responding to different areas and needs of the publication, right? And so, you know, when things were sort of mentally taxing and tiresome, you know, reaching out to, let's say, Jennifer, Ann, or, you know, when we're navigating the sort of like intensity of this project was really important to happen. And I think that I felt the words of so many contributors in this book, both in terms of things that I had experienced myself, or, you know, listening to the journey of a new design student talking about what they are now encountering and navigating. There are these moments where I'm just like, wow, like I've lived that, or I did that, or I haven't gotten there yet. Like that's not even where I'm at yet, but I'm learning through reading these. And so I think, to me, like it was both a rewarding and a overwhelming experience. And I think it had its moments of being taxing, I think in part because the world, the pandemic, all that was happening in 2020 and all through this process, even now, right? All of the world events were also taxing. So I think that we were just trying to balance like, you know, how we were connecting with each other, but also how we could balance even, you know, the words and the emotions of the contributors that we were engaged with, because we wanted to take care of that work and their experiences too. So I'll just put it there and kind of pass it to anyone else who has thoughts on this question.
Well, I want to quickly say that for me, it wasn't emotionally taxing to read the essays. You know, almost every essay, as I read it, I was like, wow. You know, I didn't know what people would write. I didn't know that 75 people could write so well. Not 70, I just increased the number of contributors, but I didn't know that everyone would write so much and so well. Of course, we had work to do as editors, but I found it actually, I don't know if to uplifting. I found it was a very rewarding experience to read all of these essays. Maybe validating might be the word to use, you know, whether the essay was more visionary and future focused and positive, or even if it was documenting a more difficult experience that I could identify with. It just made you feel, I think, less alone than as a Black designer. So I didn't think it was emotionally taxing. I thought it was an uplifting experience.
Yeah, and I'm gonna steal Leslie's words. So she gave it up rewarding. I did think it was rewarding as well, and inspirational. You know, I definitely learned a lot working on this project through the words of the contributors, but also working with these amazing design educators, Black women who were just very available and open, and it was an absolute honor to be a part of the conversation and to be in conversation with them, especially during the pandemic where, you know, we were all locked away in our little hovels. And like I said, I have like, you know, 2 little people. So it was good to have grown-up conversations with grown-up people every week or so. And it was an amazing experience. So thank you all for, you know, having me be a part of it.
Yeah, it definitely helped. I think even Lesley, the writing sort of workshops that you sort of helped us curate, and Lesley had, you know, these writing times that, you know, that were open to contributors or to the editors to get together and write. And I think for me, in those sessions, it was nice to sort of cross paths a little bit with some of the contributors. And I know, Maurice, I saw you in a few, and sometimes it's nice to start putting some faces, actual faces to some of the works coming in, especially because you're not necessarily necessarily in contact with other contributors who are not in your chapter. So I think that, helped to feel a little bit more connected. I would say emotionally, there were just a lot of things that happened in the world, but also personally, there are things that, were happening, in our lives. And I think those external factors, if anything, in some ways made it taxing sometimes, but again, like having the camaraderie of the community of editors to fall back on was rewarding, or made a big difference.
Thank you so much, Penina. I'm just going to jump in and thank you all again for joining us. For those that have to depart a bit right at 7:30, we are going to take just one more question, and also share the others in conversations in my MODA. I have a special request of all of you this evening. MODA has a big summer camp program that teaches kids to think like designers while using STEM tools. Our goal is to help young designers become problem solvers that the world needs, those who can help design a just and equitable world. We're working hard to ensure that all children that may not have access to resources to join our camp are able to do so. And last year, 51 children attended our camps free of charge, thanks to contributions of the MODA community and members who believe that children are the future. We're raising funds again to invite children to attend our camps again this year. If you're able to, we'd be grateful if you'd consider making a tax-deductible contribution at any level to our campaign. I'll add the link to the chat, but it's givebutter.com/campmoda. And so thank you so much for considering this as a way of uplifting future change makers. And thank you again, Maurice, for Vision Path. If you don't know Revision Path, please check that out and learn and enjoy and engage, and definitely purchase the Black Experience in Design. We have shared, I know I can hold mine too. We all have ours, and check yours out. And there are links in the chat in conversations on my MODA that you can explore your independent book publisher if you're here in Atlanta. So thank you so much again, everyone, for those that have to go. And Sharon, I know you had a question, and Eric, you had a question. I'll let Eric, he did share his first, so I'll let him jump into the mic. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Greetings. Eric Harvey wondering, been hearing a lot about these NFTs, and I'm just thinking about emerging design practices, and I'm wondering, how are they being viewed by current academics and professionals? As just another tool or another medium? And also, are there any Black diasporic NFT designers that one might want to watch?
I can jump in with answering the last question that you asked about some designers to watch. Some of them I've had the courtesy of having on my podcast, Revision Path. For those that want to check it out, it's at revisionpath.com. One person in particular who actually lives here in Atlanta is Hank Washington. Hank Washington has a series of NFTs called Fuzzies, F-U-Z-Z-I-E-S, that's worth checking out. He's been doing Fuzzies now, I think, for maybe about a year or so he's been doing it. Who else have I had on the show? Gabe Galt. Gabe is a fine artist that lives out in Los Angeles, son of Willie Galt, the famous footballer. He's been dabbling in NFTs as well. Actually, I don't know how active you are on Twitter, but there's a very robust like metaverse/NFT community of people on Twitter. There are several people, lots of them Black women, that are getting into NFTs and the metaverse and kind of that whole Web3, I guess, environment, as you want to kind of call it. But there's even been a couple of news stories, particularly about Black women that have been making a lot of money from NFTs. I'm thinking of there's like a 12-year-old designer, Nyla. I can't recall her last name, but her first name is Nyla, N-Y-L-A, who made like $4 million off NFTs. There's a Canadian artist, Lana Danina, who also came up with a very substantial financial windfall from NFTs. I think it's still a little bit early to tell in terms of maybe how they're being used by academics. I don't know if anyone on the panel can sort of speak to that, but I'm definitely seeing a lot of Black illustrators and artists kind of dipping their toe into that realm.
I think, Maurice, you handled this question. I am not as familiar with NFTs. So I think I'm going to defer to you with that response and where things stand at this moment.
I think it'll be interesting to see how academics kind of look at it, because it's still so new, because it's still such an emerging topic in general. I think time will tell. Certainly what we're starting to see, at least in the news, is sort of maybe a bit of a flattening in the interest of NFTs as people start to try to cash them out and realize maybe they're not as much as their inflated value might have been. There's a story going on right now about a person who bought an NFT of Jack Dorsey's first tweet. Jack Dorsey's former CEO of Twitter. He purchased it for several $1 million and is probably getting maybe less than a 1% return on it in terms of resale value. So it's a little too early to tell, I think, but there's a active and robust community online that is steadily trying to figure it out and find their place in this new kind of Web3 metaverse universe.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, is this an opportunity for incorporating them, like say, like on a building or almost like a ticker tape type of thing? Or, I mean, what?
Possibly. I mean, I don't see how that could be any different from what you see now, like in Times Square, but I'm sure there's a possibility. I mean, I think, and I don't want to go on too long, don't get me start talking about the metaverse, but certainly I think in those digital spaces, it's probably a bit more valuable in terms of real estate and value. Certainly the concepts of digital land and digital worlds as it relates to the metaverse and NFTs is something that a lot of companies are sinking like hundreds of thousands of dollars into. And we're not just talking small companies, but big companies, Nike, Adidas, or et cetera, are trying to find a way to be a part of this new kind of metaverse that is, I wouldn't even say coming, it's here. It may not be accessible to everyone in the same way that we access the internet, but it's definitely here. People are definitely trying to stake their claim in it. There could be real world potential to it, but honestly, at this point, it wouldn't be any different than what you'd see probably like on an electronic billboard in Times Square.
Great. So we'll just jump with Sharon, if you're still here. If not, we'll take this to conversations and let everyone enjoy their night. Are you still here, Sharon?
Yes, ma'am. I am still
Okay.
here.
All right. Awesome. Okay.
Thank you so much for good talk. My question is about empathy. Fast Company just had an article about how empathy is becoming big business and it's turning into more almost like a deeper personalization, as opposed to, you know, the real driver behind empathy-driven design being you concern yourself with that person's journey, so to speak. So my question is, earlier someone said, you know, when it comes to the word Black, that it is, you know, kind of your experience is yours. And I wonder with Black designers, if there's like the thinking around not letting it become the driver of what we do within as Black designers, becoming this is like a hyper personalization of the Black experience versus designing for other Black people, where it's not like an exploitation of, you know, someone comes to you and says, oh, you're a Black designer, design something for me that is for the Black community, versus understanding, you know, as a Black person, that Black isn't, it has its own experiences, you know, that you have to be empathetic to. I hope that all made sense. I'm sorry.
I can jump in. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that I feel like I've been approached for projects based on work that I've done, where it's like, okay, go do this thing that's like for Black people, but it may also be a subset, a niche subset of our population, where I'm like, I don't actually have that experience or exposure to be able to kind of articulate well in the way that I'm being perceived. And so I think one thing I can say is that there are definitely sort of coming up against how you're being viewed, processed, the work that you're doing, and then assuming that all of it is the same. I have students who are coming to me in various disciplines across, like, you know, even my university, who are like, oh, well, I'm talking about this kind of thing about Blackness, so you might know about this Black thing about Blackness. And I'm like, actually, I don't, but I can redirect you to the people who do. And so I feel as though there is a sensitivity for me to be aware of how I may be doing that to someone else, how others are doing it to me, how I have to be very thoughtful about like what commissions even come to me in terms of projects, and whether I feel like I'm being exploited, or others might be exploited in a project. And so I think that empathy piece, just to answer your question, I'm really sensitive to it because I've been on the other side when someone takes my story and does not present it in the way that it should be. And I think that there has to be an awareness that just because you had one path doesn't mean it's the same as someone else, but also to the point that I'd said earlier, to take care of someone's words, someone's voice is really critical, because you can be really reckless with it. And I think that has a lot of ramifications. And so I try to be, in my own practice, in the way that I work with others, to be really mindful about how I collaborate, how I, engage in dialogue, how I am wanting to sort of, create visibility, but I also, it sometimes can be a fine line. And I think you have to be conscious and aware, both in terms of how people are presenting things to you and how you present to others.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
yes, perfectly. Yes.
That's how I'm responding.
No, that's perfect. That was kind of what I was thinking, because I think for a very long time, it's always been kind of, Black is just this one thing, this monolith. And as designers become more and more available and vocal, and there's more going on coming from Black designers, I think it's preparing a world for, this is not going to be the exact same thing. It's not all going to, have the same voice, the same feel, because not everyone is the same person, much less the same Black person. But thank you.
Yeah, I think Kelly says it really well when she talks about how we're not a monolith. And I think about it in my own experience as, a Ugandan and an African and is coming to the US for college, and how at some point I started to see a theme of how it seemed like I was it's like, one, okay, yes, you kind of become the poster child of diversity on the website and things like that. And at first it's kind of like, oh, this is nice, like, I'm being asked to do these things. But then you kind of start to realize that, it seems like there's a role I'm playing here time after time, or you kind of become the spokesperson for the whole continent and things like that. So I think to some of what Kelly was saying, we have to start pushing back to some of these notions and remind people to stop being lazy about their desire to learn about what it means to be Black, or to learn about what it means to be African. It's like, no, you can do research. There's a book now, like, we can point people to resources, but I think it's us making sure that we push back, but also provide like we educate. It's exhausting because at some point it's like, oh my goodness, this kind of has to stop. You think that people should know better, but sometimes it just seems like they just do not know. So what does it look like for us to push back, to refer people to resources, but also to recognize for ourselves, like Kelly was saying, as you're taking on opportunities, when is it more kind of like a token, or when is it really like in line with what you're doing? Because just by virtue of being Black, I don't have to do all like race-based projects, or even in my own community engaged practice. Granted, I work a lot in communities here in St. Louis that are more under-resourced or represented. It just so happens that a lot of them are the African American communities, and I love that work. I mean, this season I'm like, yes, that's the work I'm doing, but even more with more specificity, that it's engaging with a lot of these communities in public health related works that intersect with design. So even then, there's a specific lens that I'm interested in. So just reminding people, just not be lazy with your, just anyway.
Thank you so much for your question, Sharon.
Thank you.
So much insight. Thank you, Leslie, Kelly again, Penina, Kareem. Thank you so much, Maurice. Thank you, Laura. And thank everyone. Thank you. Have a great night. If you have more questions, follow up with all of our speakers, our beautiful panelists tonight. Purchase the book. Check them out on my MODA, check out Revision Path. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.